My best friend copied my entire life for 10 years. I stayed silent, until she tried to steal my baby's name. My name is Hannah Mercer, and I met Bethany Collins on the first day of college orientation when we were both 18. We were assigned to be roommates in the freshman dorms, a random pairing that seemed like fate at the time. Bethany was from a small town in Iowa, quiet and uncertain about navigating college life. I had grown up in Chicago, more confident and outgoing, and I naturally took her under my wing. We became inseparable almost immediately, staying up late talking about our dreams, studying together, exploring the city on weekends. She was the sister I never had, and I thought our friendship would last forever. The first time Bethany copied something of mine, I was flattered. We were sophomores, and I had decided to major in marketing after taking an introductory course that fascinated me. 2 weeks later, Bethany switched her major from education to marketing as well. When I asked why, she said my enthusiasm had inspired her to explore the field. It seemed innocent enough, even sweet that she valued my opinions so much. Then I started dating Josh, a guy from my economics class. Bethany suddenly became interested in his roommate Tyler, someone she had previously described as boring. She engineered situations where the four of us would hang out together, and within a month, she and Tyler were officially a couple. Again, it seemed like coincidence. We were young and living similar lives. Of course, our experiences would overlap. After graduation, I accepted a position at a boutique marketing agency in downtown Chicago. The job was perfect for me, creative and challenging with opportunities for growth. Bethany had been planning to move back to Iowa, but after I got my job, she suddenly decided she couldn't leave the city. She applied to the same agency and was hired in a junior role. We were thrilled to be working together, at least initially. The pattern continued but intensified as we entered our 20s. I got highlights in my dark brown hair, and Bethany showed up the next week with identical highlights. I started taking yoga classes at a specific studio, and Bethany joined the same classes on the same schedule. I adopted a rescue dog, a golden retriever mix I named Cooper, and 3 months later Bethany got a golden retriever mix she named Tucker. When I mentioned I was saving for a trip to Italy, Bethany immediately started planning the same trip and suggested we go together. Some of these things I genuinely didn't mind. Having a friend who shared my interests made life easier in many ways. But there was something uncomfortable about the way Bethany seemed to have no independent thoughts or preferences. She didn't just enjoy similar things. She waited to see what I did and then replicated it exactly. She never suggested we try something new or different. She simply followed my lead in every aspect of life. The copying extended to my personal style. If I bought a dress, Bethany would ask where I got it and buy the same one in a different color. If I changed my makeup routine, she would interrogate me about products and techniques until she could recreate my look. If I redecorated my apartment, she would ask for photos and shopping lists so she could achieve the same aesthetic. Our colleagues at work started making jokes about it. They called us twins even though we looked nothing alike. I had dark hair and green eyes while Bethany was blonde and blue-eyed. But we dressed similarly, wore our hair in similar styles, even had similar mannerisms because Bethany unconsciously mimicked the way I spoke and moved. I tried talking to Bethany about it once when we were 25. I told her gently that while I loved that we had so much in common, I sometimes felt like she was copying me rather than developing her own identity. She looked genuinely hurt and confused. "I'm not copying you, Hannah," she said. "You just have really good taste and I trust your judgment. Is it wrong to be inspired by my best friend? I thought you'd be happy that we're so similar. It means we're compatible as friends." I felt guilty for bringing it up and dropped the subject. Maybe I was being self-centered, thinking everything she did was about me. Maybe we really were just naturally similar and I was reading too much into coincidence. When I was 27, I met David at a friend's wedding. He was an architect, thoughtful and creative with a dry sense of humor that matched mine perfectly. We fell in love quickly, and within a year, we were engaged. Bethany was genuinely happy for me, or so it seemed. She helped me plan the wedding, standing beside me through dress fittings and vendor meetings. Then Bethany's relationship with Tyler, which had been lukewarm for years, suddenly intensified. She had always complained that Tyler wasn't ambitious enough, that he lacked direction. But around the time David and I got engaged, Bethany started talking about Tyler's hidden potential and how much he had matured. 6 months after my wedding, Bethany and Tyler got engaged as well. Bethany's wedding planning was eerily familiar. She chose the same venue I had used. She hired the same photographer and florist. Her bridesmaid dresses were in a different color but the same style as mine had been. When I pointed out the similarities, she claimed it was because she had seen how well my vendors performed and wanted the same quality for her own wedding. It was a reasonable explanation, but it felt hollow. David noticed the pattern before I was fully willing to admit how pervasive it had become. About a year into our marriage, he commented that Bethany seemed to model her entire life after mine. I defended her initially, but David was persistent. "Think about it objectively," he said. "You bought a condo in Lincoln Park, and 3 months later she and Tyler bought in the same building. You adopted a second dog, and she immediately started looking for a second dog. You started taking French classes, and now she signed up for French classes. At what point does this stop being flattering and start being invasive?" I couldn't argue with his observations because they were all true. Every major decision I made, Bethany replicated within weeks or months. She had been doing it for almost 10 years, and I had been making excuses for it because acknowledging the truth meant confronting how strange and unhealthy our friendship had become. The situation reached a crisis point when David and I started trying for a baby. We had been married for 3 years, both established in our careers, and felt ready for the next chapter. After 6 months of trying, I got pregnant. David and I were overjoyed. We waited until I was safely into the second trimester before sharing the news widely. Bethany's reaction to my pregnancy announcement was enthusiastic but also unsettling. She immediately started asking detailed questions about my conception timeline, my doctor, my prenatal vitamins, my symptoms. She wanted to know everything, taking notes as if she were studying for an exam. 2 months later, Bethany announced she was pregnant too. She and Tyler had been ambivalent about children, with Bethany often saying she wasn't sure she wanted the responsibility. But suddenly she was glowing with maternal excitement, her due date almost exactly 3 months after mine. Throughout my pregnancy, Bethany copied every choice I made. I hired a particular midwife practice, and she switched to the same practice. I registered at a specific store for baby items, and she created an almost identical registry. I decorated the nursery in soft greens and creams, and she showed me photos of her nursery in the exact same palette. When I mentioned I was taking a prenatal yoga class, she enrolled in the same class despite being in a different trimester and having different physical needs. David was less tolerant of the copying now that it extended to our unborn child. "This isn't normal, Hannah. You need to set boundaries with her. She's not just copying your life anymore. She's trying to live it simultaneously." I knew he was right, but I didn't know how to address it without destroying a friendship that had defined most of my adult life. Bethany had been there for me through breakups and job stress and family problems. She was going to be my daughter's godmother. How could I tell her that her friendship had become suffocating? The breaking point came when we were both about 7 months pregnant. David and I had spent weeks choosing a name for our daughter. We wanted something classic but not too common, meaningful but not too precious. We settled on Eleanor Rose, Eleanor after David's grandmother who had passed away the year before, and Rose after my mother's middle name. The name felt perfect, honoring both sides of our family while giving our daughter an identity that was both timeless and beautiful. I shared the name with Bethany during one of our regular coffee dates, excited to finally reveal what we'd chosen after keeping it secret for so long. I told her the family significance and why it felt right. Bethany smiled and said it was beautiful, that Eleanor Rose was a perfect name. 3 days later, Bethany called me, sounding breathless with excitement. Hannah, Tyler and I finally settled on a name. We've been struggling with it for weeks, but last night it just came to us. We're naming her Eleanor Rose. Isn't that incredible? We both separately thought of it, and when we said the names out loud at the same time, we knew it was meant to be. I sat in stunned silence, my phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what I had just heard. She was planning to name her daughter the exact same name I had chosen for mine. Not a similar name, not a name with one element in common, but the identical full name I had shared with her 3 days earlier. Bethany, that's the name I just told you we chose for our daughter, I said, my voice remarkably calm despite the rage building inside me. I know, isn't it such a funny coincidence? Bethany said, her tone bright and oblivious. We must just have really similar taste in names, just like we have similar taste in everything else. Our daughters will basically be named twins. How cute is that? It's not a coincidence, I said, my voice hardening. I told you that name 3 days ago. You can't use it for your daughter. There was a pause on the line. When Bethany spoke again, her tone had shifted to defensive. You don't own a name, Hannah. Eleanor Rose is a beautiful name and Tyler and I have every right to use it if we want to. You can't call dibs on words. This isn't about ownership, I said, my carefully maintained calm starting to crack. This is about you copying literally every aspect of my life for 10 years, and now you're trying to give your daughter the same name as mine. The same name I chose for specific family reasons that have nothing to do with you. This has gone too far. I'm not copying you, Bethany said, and I could hear tears in her voice now. I'm inspired by you. You're my best friend and you make good choices, and yes, sometimes I follow your lead, but that's what friends do. They influence each other. You're being incredibly selfish and controlling about this. I'm being selfish? I asked incredulously. Bethany, you have replicated my entire life. My career, my hobbies, my home, my style, my wedding, and now my baby name. You don't have a single original thought or preference. Everything you do is just a slightly delayed version of something I did first. And when I try to set one boundary, one thing that's mine and not ours, you call me selfish. If you felt this way, why didn't you say something years ago? Bethany demanded. Why did you let me be your friend all this time if you thought I was just some pathetic copycat? Because I thought it would stop, I said honestly. I thought it was a phase or insecurity that you'd grow out of. I thought eventually you'd develop your own identity and your own interests. But you haven't. And now you're copying the most personal decision David and I have made, and I can't pretend this is normal or okay anymore. We argued for another 10 minutes before Bethany hung up on me. I sat in my living room, 7 months pregnant and shaking with anger and sadness. David came home to find me crying and I told him everything that had happened. You need to end this friendship, David said firmly. I know that's painful, but Hannah, this woman is not healthy for you. This isn't what friendship looks like. This is obsession or codependency or something else, but it's not a reciprocal, supportive relationship between equals. I knew he was right, but the thought of losing Bethany felt like losing part of myself. She had been woven into my life for a decade. Our friend groups overlapped completely. We worked at the same company, lived in the same building, and attended the same prenatal yoga class. Disentangling from her would mean restructuring my entire social world. Over the next week, I talked to my therapist about the situation. She helped me see that what I had interpreted as flattery was actually a form of identity disturbance on Bethany's part. Healthy people have their own preferences and make their own choices. Bethany had been using me as a template for her entire adult life, never developing her own sense of self. My therapist suggested that enabling this behavior wasn't actually helping Bethany, that setting boundaries might force her to finally figure out who she was independent of me. I decided to write Bethany a letter rather than trying to have another phone conversation. I needed to be clear and complete, and I knew we would just argue if we spoke in person. In the letter, I laid out the pattern I had observed over 10 years. I explained that while I valued our friendship, I couldn't continue in a dynamic where she replicated every choice I made. I told her that using the name Eleanor Rose for her daughter was a boundary I wasn't willing to compromise on, that this name had family significance for me and David, and that her insistence on using it despite knowing how much it meant to us was the final evidence that our friendship had become toxic. I ended the letter by suggesting we take a break from the friendship, at least until after both babies were born and we had time to think about whether we could rebuild the relationship on healthier terms. I told her I hoped she would use this time to explore who she was independent of me, to develop her own interests and preferences and identity. Bethany's response came 2 days later, and it was not what I expected. Instead of anger or defensiveness, she sent a long, tearful voicemail acknowledging that everything I had said was true. She admitted that she had been copying me for years, that she didn't know how to make decisions on her own, that she had always felt lost and inadequate and had latched onto me as a guide for how to live. She said she didn't even really want to name her daughter Eleanor Rose, that she had suggested it because some part of her wanted to see if I would finally set a boundary, if there was a limit to what I would tolerate. "I need help, Hannah," she said in the voicemail, her voice breaking. "I need therapy or something because you're right, this isn't normal. I don't know who I am without you, and that's terrifying. I'm so sorry for everything. I'm sorry for taking the name, I'm not going to use it. I'm sorry for copying your whole life. I'm just so sorry." Her admission was heartbreaking and validating at the same time. I had spent years questioning whether I was being egotistical or paranoid, and here was confirmation that the pattern was real and as pervasive as I had suspected. But knowing that Bethany was aware of it and struggling with her own issues made the whole situation more complicated. I didn't respond to her voicemail immediately. I needed time to process and figure out what I wanted. Did I want to maintain any relationship with Bethany? Could we rebuild on healthier terms? Or was it better for both of us to completely separate? I gave birth to Eleanor Rose in June, a perfect, healthy baby girl with David's dark eyes and my stubborn chin. The first few weeks of motherhood were overwhelming and beautiful and exhausting in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. I was so consumed with caring for my daughter that I barely thought about Bethany or the unresolved situation between us. Bethany gave birth to her daughter in September, 3 months after Eleanor. She sent me a single text with a photo and the baby's name, Isabel Quinn. It was a beautiful name, completely different from Eleanor Rose. The text said simply, "I chose this myself. It's the first real decision I've made in years. Thank you for forcing me to figure out who I am." I looked at the photo of Isabel, a beautiful baby with Bethany's blonde hair and Tyler's round face, and felt something soften inside me. Bethany had actually listened. She had chosen her own path for once, even if it was just in the small act of naming her daughter something original. Over the next year, Bethany and I maintained distance but not complete silence. She would occasionally text me photos of Isabel or ask specific parenting questions, but the constant need to know every detail of my life had stopped. She sent me updates about starting therapy and working through her identity issues with a professional. She told me she had realized how unhealthy our dynamic had been and that she took full responsibility for creating it. Slowly, cautiously, we began rebuilding some version of friendship. But it was different now, based on honesty about our past patterns and commitment to healthier boundaries. Bethany started developing her own interests, things she chose because they genuinely appealed to her rather than because I had done them first. She took up photography, something I had no interest in. She started listening to different music, reading different books, wearing clothes that reflected her own emerging style rather than mine. It wasn't always smooth. There were moments when old patterns would resurface and I would have to gently point them out. When she mentioned wanting to take Eleanor to the same music class Isabel attended, I had to tell her that I needed our daughters to have some separate experiences. She understood and enrolled Isabel in a different program. 2 years after our falling out, Bethany and I met for coffee, both of us with our daughters in tow. Eleanor was walking and talking, a bright, energetic toddler. Isabel was quieter but equally delightful, watching everything with serious blue eyes. We talked about the challenges of toddlerhood and juggling work and motherhood. The conversation was easier than it had been in years because Bethany wasn't interrogating me for information to replicate. She was sharing her own genuine experiences and asking for perspective rather than instructions. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," Bethany said during a pause in our conversation. "About the name and everything that led up to that moment. I was so lost, Hannah. I didn't know how to be a person without a template to follow. Using you as that template felt safe because you always seemed so confident and sure of yourself. But it wasn't fair to you and it wasn't healthy for me. I'm glad you're figuring out who you are," I said. "And I'm sorry I didn't set boundaries sooner. I enabled the pattern by not speaking up." "You were being a good friend," Bethany said. "I was being a parasite. There's a difference." We both laughed, the tension that had defined years of our friendship finally starting to ease. Our daughters played together, two little girls who would hopefully grow up to be friends without the toxic dynamics their mothers had navigated. Looking back now, I can see that the name incident was both the worst moment in our friendship and the catalyst for something healthier. If Bethany hadn't pushed me to my absolute limit by trying to take the one thing I explicitly told her was deeply personal and meaningful, I might have continued enabling her copying indefinitely. And she might never have been forced to confront her own lack of identity and do the hard work of figuring out who she was. The friendship we have now isn't what it was in college or through our 20s. It's not that intense, inseparable connection where we knew everything about each other and spent all our time together. But it's more authentic. Bethany is becoming her own person, making her own choices, developing her own preferences. When we spend time together now, it's because we genuinely enjoy each other's company, not because she needs to study me to figure out how to live her life. Eleanor Rose is now 4 years old, a smart, creative little girl who loves dinosaurs and art. Isabel is quiet and thoughtful, fascinated by bugs and numbers. They're different children with different personalities, being raised by mothers who are finally learning to be different people with different lives. And that difference, I've learned, is what makes real friendship possible. Not copying or competition, but genuine appreciation for who each person is independently. It took 10 years and almost losing the friendship entirely, but we finally got there.